I founded and directed the Beckley Foundation, which is a charitable trust in England.
In England? In what city?
In Oxford.
And what does this foundation do?
It does scientific research into consciousness and its altered states, and it also does international drug policy.
You mean the governments, how governments think about drugs in general?
Yes, I've organised 5 big seminars on drugs and society, a rational perspective at which the UN and EU and ministers and the top scientists come to get them together so that they can discuss this difficult matter.
We're here at an LSD conference, and LSD was legal and a lot of research was done until 1966, a little bit later in other countries, and then it was forbidden. How is the situation now?
That's exactly what I'm trying to break through and get research being done on particular LSD. And I'm just about to get the first pilot study on LSD with human subjects in America, strangely. But in England it's still very difficult. You can't use LSD in scientific research.
Can you use it in therapeutic sessions?
At the moment not legally, which is a tragedy. And those are the 2 doors I think very much need to be opened, and that's what the Beckley Foundation is struggling to do.
Are the governments of the world changing their mind about this slowly, or?
I was talking to the head of the UN drug policy, and he privately seems very sympathetic, but everything is controlled by the American attitude, which is, as you know, zero tolerance on all drugs.
Now, there was a lot of research done in the years before 1966 and a little bit afterwards, and even now there's some research going on the effects of LSD in therapeutic sessions. Do you think there's much to be learned yet about the effects and the positive effects, for instance, in psychotherapy?
There's an enormous amount to be learned. Actually, there's no research being using LSD at the moment in the world, legally, scientific research. It's only done on animals, rats. Nothing is done on humans. And since LSD affects the higher cortical centres, one can only discover how it works by observing what happens in the human brain, which now, since it's been forbidden, the art of brain imaging has grown exponentially, as has neuroscience. So we could learn a lot about consciousness and what underlies it by studying what happens.
So you're implying that the new technology, MRI scans, brain scans, electroencephalogram scans of the brain would actually help understand better the effects on the various centers in the brain?
Enormously. And not only would it help us understand how LSD works, it would make us understand more about what is consciousness and how does its states alter. So we would find out more about depression and bliss and different states of consciousness. So it'd be very, very valuable to open this door. And it's an orchard filled with ripe fruit, is how I see it.
But what one would assume, hearing many positive reports from people who have used LSD in the past or in the recent past illegally, that the scientific world would be very open to research and say, why don't we do this, even in countries that are a little bit less strict?
Yes, I mean, I think we've now got to the point where in countries like Holland, and I'm putting forward 2 research projects in Holland on LSD, I think we'll be able to do it. And in England, where I know the top scientists, surprisingly, we still can't do psychedelics. But maybe in a year, when it's been done somewhere else, maybe then we'll be able to do it there. But at the present, there's no law against it, but they're frightened of one wouldn't get ethical approval.
From the colleagues, or as a doctor you would lose your license, things like that?
Yeah, you couldn't, unless it's legal, you can't publish results, and so it's a circular problem. But I hope we can break it down.
Why your interest in LSD and not in MDMA, 2CB, Iboga? There's many other substances, and one could say that science, chemistry has advanced and gives you more appropriate means to address problems of the mind.
Well, I think they're all interesting and all have their different uses, but I think LSD is particularly interesting because it's the one which expands without changing. It just makes intensifies experience, makes more of the brain work. I think it probably increases the supply of blood to the brain globally, so that we have simultaneously billions more brain cells working, and that makes us feel, see, think deeper. And I think that's a benefit for our poor, struggling humanity, and we should research it.
Okay, that's very clear. Now, about Albert Hofmann, did you meet him? Do you have contacts with him?
Yes, I've met him, and I found him a delightful and charming, wonderful example of how you can be at 100.
Can you tell me a little, maybe, anecdote of your meetings with...
Well, the one which comes to my mind was, I said, had he ever thought that LSD might increase the volume of blood in his brain? And he said, no, he's a chemist, not a physiologist, but that he hung from his feet every day to get more blood in his brain. So I thought that was very charming. And he's just utterly charming, and he loves life by the minute. And
do you think that's a result of him taking LSD, or the fact that he was exposed to so many other wise people and famous people and writers in his lifetime?
One can never tell what is the result of what, can one? But the end result is that he's the most joyous human being. But probably it's just personality and a deep sense of the mystical.
Yeah, that is amazing. He refers to his childhood experiences there, and he said that all of us have probably these experiences, we just forget them.
Yes, or alternatively we don't open up to them. And I think that's the great value of the psychedelics, and particularly LSD, is that it loosens the constrictions of the ego, so that it allows the parts of the brain which are normally repressed to be flooded with light, and things like the mystical sense can come to the top of consciousness. Which is the same as the mystical. That's really what I'm interested in at the Beckley, is studying the similarities and the differences between the high-level mystical experience as achieved through meditation. I've done a study with very high-level meditator having a mystical experience in a MEG machine, which picks up all the brainwaves. And then I want to compare it with high-level LSD experience and see the similarities and the difference in the different states, and we could learn a lot that way.
Huston Smith in the States is a famous writer about religion. He writes a lot about the psychedelic experience. He was part of the Friday experiment, but he told me at one time that he had never had a mystical experience without it.
Yes.
And he was always wondering, are they the same? Could you comment?
He is a great expert, and I remember him saying that all his great experiences were with it. But I have to say that this Sister Genti had a mystical experience in the MEG machine, which is not an ideal position, and she said it was like being flooded with light and the love of God. That's how she described it. And in her brainwaves, they totally changed. And what was very interesting was it was very high gamma. And that also happens with psychedelics, I think I'm beginning to know.
So there is a physiological similarity.
Yes, yeah, I think there is.
Okay, thank you.
Not